This is a Q Media production.
Today on the podcast, we delve into startups, scale-ups, culture, empathy, and the power of storytelling beyond marketing. Steve Grace, the CEO and founder of the Nudge Group, brings his experience in scaling businesses and navigating global markets. Through the Nudge Group and Nudge Productions, Steve connects startups with top talent and produces high-quality content. He also leads TNG Media, comprising of brands such as Balance the Grind and Startup Life Unscripted. Enjoy the episode. Hey, Steve. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Lauren.
So you have spent a bit of time over the last few years in startup land.
I have.
How do you know that you've hit a winner?
With the startup? That's a great question. So I think, you know what they say? They say 8 out of 10 startups fail. It's not true. It's much, much lower than that, which I think is really interesting. But how do you know you've hit a winner? It takes a long time. But I think, in my view, you've hit a winner if you don't give up and you don't stop. Because it doesn't matter how many times you change it and twist it and turn it. Like other large companies have to constantly change too. It only is a failure when you stop trying.
So let's hit into your experience around startups. So now you've run 2 successful ones where you've grown and sold them. A lot of businesses out there are looking to scale and grow. So let's start from the beginning. How do you know how to actually grow? What are the first steps that you do?
I think when you start a startup, you have a huge vision in your head, right? Because starting a startup for a lot of people can be quite scary. I think once you've done it a few times, it becomes far less scary like anything. But to me, you have to have this massive grand vision. Otherwise, you're just not going to do it because it's so hard. I think the beginning is easy because it's just you on your own and you've got only yourself accountable and your idea. No one's judging you. No one, right? You're just having a crack. And then as you begin to scale and get more and more people, that's when things start to get a little bit more tricky. So I think, how do you know then? You probably want to look at getting some people on who believe in your idea. I think that's the number one thing. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're growing their startup from a people person is they hire people who they think are just amazing at their jobs. You actually have to hire people who believe in your mission more than anything, regardless of their skills in their job. I really believe that at the beginning.
And how do you know where to put them? How do you know where to slot them in the organization?
Well, that's the beauty of startups. There are no slots. Everyone's doing every slot. So I think in that respect, it's a case of like, let's get people who believe in the mission. Let's get people who are very, very good with ambiguity, who don't really mind if they're doing something different tomorrow than today and doing something very different 6 months down the line. And also let's get some people who will come up with some ideas as to what they can do. So you need a very different type of person at the very beginning than you do a year in, than you do 4 years in, than you do 6 years in. And that kind of personality you hire or persona changes constantly.
So you talked before about coming in with an idea and then you tack one way and tack the other. What are some of the inputs that you would get to know that it's time to tack?
I think, depends how early it is, but I think initially it's a feeling, it's a gut feeling. Once you start taking a product to market and you get that product market fit. So let's say you've got that far, you've got your product, taking it to market, people want it, people are buying it. You're not making a profit, but people want it. Then you really want to look at what they are giving you in terms of feedback. And I think startups do this far better than corporates do this, right? And I think it's a big learning curve for corporates is that startups are very, very good at engaging with their audiences and almost not necessarily designing their product line around what those customers want, but designing their product line around what those customers' problems are. And as they uncover more problems by creating more solutions, because that's what happens when you create a solution, you usually create another problem. That can kind of tack you in different directions.
So as we're growing, we're putting people kind of fitting in, slotting in, doing what they want. You're going to get to a point where you're actually growing and you actually need structure. And I don't know, some companies I've seen happen sooner rather than later, sometimes a couple, 2, 3 years in, where suddenly we need some process. We need some structure. We actually need to do this by the book, maybe document a few things.
Every founder's nightmare. Every founder's nightmare, yep.
What do you do at that stage? Because my guess is there's some people who aren't really going to be fitting into that model anymore.
This is a great question. So I think one of the things I get asked a huge amount of is when does a startup become a scale-up and how do you manage that transition? And it's one of the most difficult transitions, probably more so for the founder. The founder needs to actually be thinking about that way, way before they get there. Because like you said, you're going to have a whole bunch of people who love ambiguity, love doing lots of different things, hate process, having a lot of fun, but they reach that point where That's just not going to cut it. And you need to start bringing in specific people to do specific tasks. And like you said, documentation and process and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, you're never going to scale. Now, the reality is, let's say you had 10 staff. Probably only 3 of them are going to make that transition. The other 7 are not going to be able to make that transition. Now, this becomes very difficult because founders have this beautiful dream, as you should as a founder, that everyone who starts the business with you is going to end up being millionaires. You're going to live on an island and it's going to be amazing. Doesn't happen very often. But so the reality is those people have to go. They have to leave the business or they have to go into a different division. And if you plan for that early enough and you have those conversations way before you need to have them, they're not awkward. Most people don't. They wait till they get there, then they wait too long, and then it inhibits their growth, and then it actually causes them problems. And then it becomes a really, really awful conversation. So I think as long as you're planning for that, and those people can be used in different ways. Like they can go and start a new product line. They can launch into a new country. There are other things sometimes you can find them to do, but a lot of them will need to be moved on because they actually become a nuisance and a menace and become really problematic for you. So it's a awful, awful time.
How quickly do you know it's time to say goodbye?
For most people, they don't until it's way, way overdue. And this is why I give so many talks on it to try and get people to be thinking about it at least a year before. So I think when you're probably at your peak fun and everything's going quite well and there's zero process, that's when you need to really start thinking about it, like way, way before.
So talking about peak fun, I mean, most startups will have these amazing cultures and everybody's facing the same way and doing really great things and really excited to show up to work. And then, as we say, we start to scale. How important is it to have a culture defined at that point? And what are the things that we need in place to make sure that that culture stays? Or is it good for a culture to shift?
It needs to shift because you're almost going, think of it like a child. You're growing up, right? You've gone from being a toddler where everything's fun to being a teenager where everything's getting hard. That's kind of the best analogy I can give, right? You don't really know what you're supposed to do, but you need to grow up and you need to find a way of doing that. And I think you can create just as much excitement in going into that grown-up phase. It's just very different excitement than it was jumping in the ball pool as a 5-year-old. So the fun can stay. It's a different kind of fun. It's a different kind of excitement. It's a different kind of energy. But the culture absolutely needs to shift from just constant chaos and mayhem and having a crack into, okay, we've got something here. Who's really excited about what we've got and who wants to be excited about taking it future? Whoever wants to carry on playing in the ball pool, go and play in someone else's ball pool. And there are a lot of people who can just do that. They're early stage specialists and that's what they should do. So that's not a bad thing for you to be like that as a person, but you need to know when it's time to leave.
Yeah, sure. And have you seen any examples where the culture was actually the downfall of the startup?
So many. I'm not going to name any names. I mean, so many. I think if you have a Peter Pan founder, it can be really problematic. There's a lot of Peter Pan founders, and that it tends to be a sort of, and I'm sure everyone knows what I mean by that, tends to be quite a common trait. I think when you have a Peter Pan founder, they need to have an exec team that's going to sit with them or a co-founder or someone that's going to add or be the grown-up in the room. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a Peter Pan founder as long as you know you're that and you're happy to have a grown-up in the room as well, if that makes sense.
It does. You've just mentioned co-founder. Now, I think a lot of people start up a business on their own, really excited. And, I suppose, it can be a bit of a challenge when you're really on your own. You can feel a bit like Robinson Crusoe, as they say. Now, understanding, I've heard that, you get a co-founder, 1 + 1 = 3. That's better and you can all work together. Tell us about how would you go about choosing this co-founder?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like a marriage. It really is. So the stats support those things. Like you are far more likely to be successful with a co-founder. You are far more likely to get funded by a venture capital firm if you've got a co-founder. You're far more likely to have a more stable culture if you've got a co-founder. Like everything supports it. I've had my own experiences in co-founders. We can touch on that. I don't have any co-founders now, by the way, so I haven't necessarily been as positive as some of those things I've just said. But I think most of the people, when they look for co-founders, look for someone who can plug a gap. So you have to look at yourself and go, okay, well, what kind of founder am I? Am I a technical founder? Am I a sales founder? Am I a marketing founder? Where are my skills? Or what do I like to do? And what do I hate to do? And then they go and find a co-founder who does the parts that either they're not very good at or they don't like. And that makes a lot of sense. And most people do it that way. And most people are encouraged to do it that way. But there's a dark side to that.
Oh, yeah. Go on.
And the dark side I have experienced. The dark side comes when you start to have success and you really begin to scale. And when you begin to really scale and you start making some proper money and you have some real process and you have grown-ups working for you and have proper business, what I've found in my case, and I have seen this, and don't quote me on, not everyone has this problem. And sometimes this is why 3 co-founders can even be better than 2. But you end up having completely different ideas as to which way the business should go. And that can cause massive problems. And that tends to happen at a point where you're, I don't know, maybe you're 50 people, maybe you're turning over 20 million. It's that kind of size where you're properly a business and decisions need to be made about strategy. And this is where you're being completely different can cause lots of problems. I think if you can have someone who's a bit more dominant and someone who's a bit less dominant, that can work. But if you have 2 dominant people, which has been my scenario in every single one, it's really, really problematic and it's very hard to overcome.
So what do you do about bringing in a board? Is that something that might help or hinder at that stage?
It absolutely can help. The thing about bringing in a board is then you need to have a clear CEO and a clear second CFO, COO. And that's where you need someone who is probably less dominant and more submissive. And then that can work. And then the board work with that. And then that person deals with the board, works really, really well. What you get a lot of is when you have 2 people who both want to be CEOs and you have co-CEOs. And we have seen that work usually in quite large organizations, to be fair. And then that doesn't work with the board. That doesn't work with the board either, because then they also disagree about who should be on the board and what's the purpose of the board and how much power should the board have. So it's a really interesting moment in time. So I think really my advice on getting co-founders is try and find someone who is either more dominant than you or less dominant than you, but not the same, because at some stage, someone's going to have to take the lead.
Let's hit that topic about money. So a lot of startups, one of the reasons they fail is because they run out of cash.
Yep.
So what is the advice that you have, starting out, getting some funds in place, but then more so ongoing? How do we know when it's time to go raise funds again? What do we do? Do we get equity? Do we get debt? What's the approach?
Yeah, look, it's a massive topic right now. There's a lot of options. Like you said, there's debt equity, there's obviously VC, there's angel investors, there's your own money, there's bootstrapping, there's goodness knows what. Look, we all saw a few years back where everybody got funded and the chaos that caused. We had a lot of terrible companies, a lot of people who thought they were great, and a lot of businesses that had no concept of what it actually is to run a business. And I think that caused a lot of pain. And now we've seen this huge change where VCs and venture capitals and angel investors need to see a road to profitability so that companies are actually thinking about that. They didn't think about that for years. And that was kind of the fun side of it, not really. And you see the glamour stories like the WeWorks and the Ubers who never make any money and get sold for billions, right? But it's very much the exception. So I think now every company needs to look at the road to profitability. Or one, they won't get funded. I think funding needs to be probably taken in the smallest amounts possible that it can be, because you want to retain your equity, you want to retain your control. What's the best option? It depends on the product. I mean, it's a very difficult question. Crowdfunding's great if you've got a consumer product. You're not going to get crowdfunding for a B2B. VCs love enterprise products because they have sticky customers. Angel investors like products that come from the domain they work in. There's not a one size fits all. If you can bootstrap it, I would recommend bootstrapping it as long as you can. Private equity companies who are coming in and buying things at the moment, they love bootstrap companies because they don't have to deal with complicated cap tables. The complexity of this, it will be another whole podcast.
I want to talk about what you're doing now, because you have successfully grown, scaled, startups. And as you said, you've just started another one. Well, maybe not just. I think you've been in there for a few years on your own, absolutely killing it now. Tell us a little bit about this business. Where did it come from? What was the idea? How did you get there? I
really didn't want to do this business. I really didn't. I'd had 2 recruitment businesses, as you know. One was in sort of digital and corporate, which we sold to a listed company, which was great. That probably hit me when I was too young, and I probably wouldn't have sold it if I was older, but it was very exciting at the time. The second one was in government, which grew enormously. And then I sold that out to my co-founder for the very reasons that we were touching on earlier, where we ended up in very, very different places. And I was determined not to do another recruitment business. So I toyed around for 6 months with all sorts of weird and wonderful things that I didn't do, which would have all gone bust because this was just prior to COVID and they all would have done really badly in COVID. And I came up with the idea that I'd never really worked well with startups. As a recruitment business, we'd recruited for them, but we'd done a really bad job. So I thought, let's build one just for startups. Now, it's completely morphed into something else now in the last 3-4 years. But the idea was I thought it would be fun. And I thought it would just be me, and it would be a lifestyle business, and it would never grow, and I'd have more free time. Didn't happen that way. It's grown. It's now all over the world. We've got podcasts. We've got media companies. We've bought other businesses. It's gone completely the other way, and I have zero time. But I am having a lot of fun.
So tell us, okay, so we've got an idea for a business. Tell us about it. Let's dig deep. How is this business, recruiting for startups, so different than any other recruitment company that's out there?
Okay, I think there was a few accidents that have happened that have enlightened me to a whole bunch of things, which I think are also very relevant to your audience in terms of corporates and larger organizations around how they should hire. So because we started 4 or 5 months before COVID, when COVID came along, we were like, what are we going to do? Because we didn't have any roles on. And now COVID actually ended up being very good for us because startups exploded, e-commerce exploded, online exploded, which was where we played. So, but there was a period of about 4 months where there was literally nothing to do. And you're at home. So we were like, well, what are we going to do? So we decided we'd start a podcast. We all know how much we love podcasts. And the reason we wanted to start a podcast is because the few roles that we did have on were for companies that no one had heard of. And you can imagine if you're someone in a job during a pandemic, you don't even know if the world's going to come out the other end. A recruiter calls and suggests you go and work for a startup. They're like, no, I've never heard of it. It's probably going to go bust. It's like, please, can you leave your perfectly stable job, work for a company you've never heard of, which according to the media has 9 out of 10 chance of failing. Not a great sales pitch. So we thought, well, why don't we interview them? And everyone was doing audio podcasts then. No one was really doing video. So like, we're going to do video podcasts. We're going to do it on YouTube. And we're going to video them. We're going to make it look like a late night TV show because I secretly always wanted one of those. And we're going to get the founders to tell their stories. And we're going to use those videos to attract people to work for them because no one does storytelling better than the person who runs the business. And if you want someone to work with you, you have to do storytelling, whether you're a corporate or whether you're a tiny company. So we started the show and it was very structured at the beginning. It became looser as time goes on and now it's totally loose. But back then, there was a number of questions we asked. The last question I would always ask to make it easy for editing, because we had no money to make this show, was why would someone come work for your company? And the founder would give a 2-3 minute answer. What we would then do is we would slice that piece of video up and we would send that to people when we approached them on LinkedIn. So we wouldn't say, hey, got a product manager role. We'd just send them the video. No text, right? No text, nothing. Just the video with the little circle on and the triangle. People have to press that, right? So they see it and they press it because they go, it's a video. I want to know what it is. And they'd watch it because it's only short. And they'd message us. They'd ignore us, or they'd message us and go, why have you sent me this? And you go, oh, we've got a job for them. And they go, oh, what's the job? Not telling you. You have to watch the rest of the video. So then you send them the whole video, which is like 20 minutes. Now, huge drop off of people's interest level here. But the few that came back to us, still didn't really know what the role was super engaged with the company. They were super engaged with the founder. And we thought, this is great. We're getting really high quality people. And it's actually a lot less work and it's a lot more engaging and no one else is really doing this. Now, we've developed it more since then. But ultimately, if you look at a traditional recruitment model, you go out to market and you tell the market you are looking for a product manager. Once you meet those people, you then say it's for this business. Once they're happy with that, you then get them to meet that manager and those people within the business. That's the traditional model. It's been done like that since time began. We've flipped it on its head. And what we do now is we say, here's the founder. You've got no idea what he does. You've got no idea who he is. Do you like him or not? Because if you don't like him, this whole conversation is pointless. Then you have to listen to the whole mission, why the company started, where it's at, where it's going. Do you like that? Does that really resonate with you? If it doesn't resonate with you, get lost. If it does, we'll go to the job. And by flipping that round the other way, the amount of candidates that come in that are passionate, that have a much greater impact, they stay a lot longer, they're happier, is blown our mind. And like I said, we discovered this purely by accident, but it's completely changed the way we've done our business. And we've grown sort of out of startups into other areas now, and we've taken into those other areas, and it's even more effective.
Do you want your team to achieve peak performance? Well, then it's time for a change. Welcome to Leading Edge. We're not about traditional training. We're about transformation. Our outcomes-based leadership development programs focus on real results through behavior change and mindset shifts. We customize programs tailored to your team's needs, packed with cutting-edge content based on neuroscience and positive psychology. We run engaging workshops, personalized coaching sessions, and practical exercises to ensure an enriching experience for your team. How does it work? we dive deep. We start with surveys to identify strengths and gaps, which helps us to design a bespoke program designed for your team's success. With our approach, progress is inevitable. Our expertly facilitated workshops and coaching sessions ensure growth, and the results speak for themselves. Are you ready to take the leap? It's simple. First, choose your program. We have 5 to choose from, or you can customize a program to suit your team's needs. Second, pick your duration. We deliver 3, 6, or 12-month programs. This way, we can reinforce the learnings over time to drive real change. And finally, plan with us. Each team is different, so we make sure that what we're delivering is exactly what you need. Let's unlock your team's potential together. Contact us today, and let's start this journey to transform your team to achieve greatness. It's really interesting because one topic that we talk about a lot is values-based recruiting. And, you can put on a job ad that these are our values and, this is what we expect from you. And, I guess you can read it and say yes, but I think living it is so different. And I love how you've explained that. One of the things you'd mentioned there as well was about storytelling and how the founder had to tell a story. And that's probably one of the most important jobs of any leader. Can you give us some tips? Like, how would you start learning how to storytell?
It's a really good question. Look, I think one of the things our show does is it helps founders storytell. I think when they start their businesses, they know how to do that. As it grows and it gets caught up and things change, they forget and they don't think about it. And what we do, and it doesn't have to be us on a show asking, you can get someone else to ask you. But if you just get someone to, because sometimes you have to rediscover what your story is. I think a lot of people actually don't know their story because they haven't thought about it or had to articulate it to anyone. So it's a very simple process. And what we do, we basically say to them, why did you start the business? What got you there? So you could, if it's a corporate, you could say, why did you start working there? Same thing. So you get to find out what caused it, what's the beginning, what happened, Then you kind of go, well, what's happening now in your life? So it could be what's happening in the company, whatever it is. You just talk to them about that. And then you go, well, what's your plans on what are you thinking, in terms of the future? What's your big plan? And just in asking those 3 questions, and you can obviously ask a lot more in there, but those 3 questions will tell you your story because it will make your brain think about it and it will tell you your current story, which might well be very different to the story you've been telling because things change without you realizing. So I think the easiest way to learn how to tell your story, it can be anyone. It can be your mum. It can be someone on a podcast. It can be anyone. Someone asks you those 3 questions. You just sit there and answer them honestly. Ideally record it because you never remember what you say. And there's your story. And then you can get better at articulating it in more ways. You can add to it and so forth. I think that's the easiest way to do that.
That's such an interesting lesson for corporates because I think, the ones that actually showcase their employees and their leaders actually talking, people can get a feel for the culture and get a feel it and want to. And I think, for a startup, it can be quite easy to do that. You got these nimble teams, but yeah, I think that's a great lesson.
I think it needs to be more relaxed. I think where corporates come in is they're often listed or they've got a lot of investors and they are towing a corporate line. So I think if you want to tell your story to your staff, do it in a more relaxed environment. Maybe don't put it out in public, do it that way because what you want is you want that individual to be relaxed, not thinking about the outcome they want. It has to be a conversation that's not outcome driven in terms of we're trying to get more investment. We want our share price to go up. We want to, it really needs to be a bit more of a genuine story. And I think a corporate story isn't just what the CEO says. A corporate story is what each department says because each department head will tell you a different story and that will reflect the culture in those departments because we all know large organizations have a lot of different subcultures going in them. So I think the hiring managers need to do that when they're hiring because that will dictate the story that's within that place as well. And then you have all these different stories that come together and that's kind of, you can have them all available on your website, internet, whatever you want to do. But I think being able to show your staff and future staff that is probably, it's a bit like that moment in a date where you start to open up a little bit.
One big topic that's coming up a lot right now is around ESG. And what sits under that is about inclusivity and belonging within an organization. And we understand that there actually is a bit of a challenge that organizations are facing to be able to hire a diverse candidate pool. So you being in recruitment, are there tips that you can share with businesses to make sure that we have a diverse pool that we can actually choose from?
It's such a difficult question. It's difficult because there's 2 sides to this, right? There's this unconscious bias that everyone talks a lot about, which I have some quite strong feelings on. Which I don't think you and I have ever chatted about, so that might surprise you. But also, I think if you're going out to try and hire in a diverse way, that's almost counterintuitive. Like the whole point of being able to have a diverse team is to not go out and try and specifically do something, is to just go out and look and go out and sort of advertise, approach people, and don't use your unconscious bias when you're approaching people. But I think you need your unconscious bias when you're actually hiring, which people don't like it when I say this, but I think it's actually super important because ultimately you want to give everybody an equal chance to come in. But at the end of the day, the final decision needs to be down on not just who's the best person in terms of capability of doing the job, who's the best person that's going to fit into your team. You can hire the best person in the world at a certain job. If they can't get on with the team they're going to have to collaborate with, it's not going to work. So if you completely remove unconscious bias, you end up with a whole bunch of people who can't work as a team. And if you can't work as a team, you're not going to achieve anything. So there's this real balancing act, right? I'm not saying that you need to just go and hire all the same people that you love, because that's not true. But I think you need to widen it as far as you can at the beginning. And look, some people might not want to work for you. So, and then you have to pull it down at the end. But I guess putting your story out there, as we've just spoken about, and making sure it's reaching the right audiences and making sure you're promoting your business and your brand into the right audiences is going to give you a more diverse candidate pool. You know, if you just advertise in certain trade presses, if you only really promote your brand in certain areas and certain countries, certain regions, you're just going to get the people in that. So I think the important thing is just getting your message as a business and a brand out to everybody, and then it's up to them if they want to work for you. If there isn't a diverse group of people that want to work for you, that's another question. And that's something that you have to look internally about. But in terms of actually getting the message out there, you just have to let as many people come in as possible.
Let's go back to the business you're in now, the Nudge Group, and the fact that we started as a recruitment, and now you've mentioned you've got media, you've got all sorts of businesses. So you have grown and scaled. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
The core reason for starting Nudge wasn't to be a recruitment company. I mean, that was what we were doing. But the core reason was to help founders. Because having scaled 2 businesses from scratch myself, I know how difficult it is and how little money you have and how hard it is. Recruitment fees are traditionally very expensive and were out of reach for a lot of startups. Also, when we had done it in our previous companies, we hadn't understood those startups, so we'd done a pretty poor job, to be fair. You know, we treated them like a corporate, and they're not, they're different. So that was the real reason for starting Nudge. It wasn't to recruit staff for them, it was to help them scale. So for us, it was quite easy to start morphing into the capital raising, to helping them tell their story, which led to media, and all the other things we do now. And we work with incubators, we do so many different things. And the premise of Nudge was that we were using what I used to call the karma circle. I haven't said that for ages, actually. No one's asked me about this for ages. We used to do a huge amount for free. So we would meet founders as early as we could, and we would help them in every way we can. We would introduce them to the VC ecosystem we would need. We would help them find suppliers. We would sometimes even do recruitment for equity if they really needed it. But the idea was that we might be engaging with them for 6 months before they ever hire anyone. Because ultimately, if we help them at the beginning, then that karma circle would bring them back to us. And it has. And I think 90% of the people that we created free media for, introduced to VCs, not all of them have, but 90% of them haven't. One became a unicorn and they didn't. I'm still upset about that. I'm not going to tell you who that is. But I do see the boys around from time to time. But
Did you give a bit of
I won't talk about it. But it was going out to help them. That was really the purpose. And that's Nudge still purpose. Number one purpose is to help those startups scale. We just are able to do it in so many more broad ways now because the business had success and that created funds, which created the ability to grow.
So did you have to find more business partners each time you actually grew, or were you able to do that organically?
Sometimes we will partner, sometimes we will joint venture. We did start to do a lot of it organically. Then we had that rough year when we had to let some people go, unfortunately, which is something that I've had to do in every company I've had, and I hate it. It's one of the most awful things in the world. So we do a lot more joint ventures now. It's quicker and it's less, I guess the startup ecosystem is relatively fragile. So you have to be careful how much commitment you put into people because it can go up and down like a yo. You know, in terms of the hiring, which is where still probably the bulk of the revenue comes from, they only hire when they get funded and then they don't hire again for ages. So you haven't got a consistent sort of income there unless you have a consistent number of startups coming through, which we do, but that I'm very aware that could turn off at any minute.
Now, I know you're putting people into startups, and my guess is there's a purpose because they want to grow. So, are there instances where you've had them come to you because, they need to do a merger or acquisition, or they have a specific need and they actually need an entire team? And how does that work? Because if we're talking about change in an organization and we're pumping in a whole bunch of new people, How does that work?
100%. I think now we sort of deal with everyone from, and the tagline is, from startup to IPO. And we are dealing with companies that are IPOing, and we are dealing with companies that are getting bought by private equity. They're significantly larger. And we're also helping them launch into new countries a lot as well. I think that has changed a lot in the way that we are operating. But we have a lot of different products now. So we have a product called Nudge Remote. If you are moving your entire team offshore, which is happening quite a lot, right? That's a massive change. We have a team that just builds teams in Philippines, Vietnam, and places like that. That's a big change piece. We have a product called Nudge as a Service, which is where we put a team on site. So rather than using an agency, you actually have like an outsourced model. And that's usually for maybe they're changing from being a marketing-led organization to a product-led organization. And that could be hundreds of roles and changes. And they can also do HR-related work and so forth and change management in that space. So I guess it really depends what they're trying to do. But yeah, there's a product for project recruitment. We've literally created, and they've all got the word nudge in. So there's there's the nudge experience, there's Nudge as a Remote, there's Nudge as a Service. There's so many different nudges. But we're trying to sort of look at all the big challenges that happen to companies on their growth journey. And like I said, we've really expanded quite a lot out of startups now. And a lot of that is change management. And a lot of that is real, I guess, organizational change. So as I was saying to you just before we came on, where the market is right now is private equity has gone ballistic. So here in Australia, obviously very, very low dollar, very, very low valuations. All the US private equity firms are flying in and they're just buying up stuff. And they're buying things from 7 to 15 to 20 million ARR. So relatively small, but they want to take them to 100 and then flick them in the next 5 years. Those companies have no process. They have very little playbooks. They have no technology. They're really quite simplistic, but they've obviously got a great product. So we are usually putting in an entire exec team. So the founding team are usually moving and leaving, or sometimes they stay, but generally they're leaving completely. So we're putting in, the whole C-levels. We're putting in playbooks. We're putting in all that kind of stuff. That's a big, big change piece, and we're putting the staff in to do that. That's very, very different to recruiting for a startup. But for us, it's still the same thing because we're still helping founders, even though they may be leaving, scale their businesses.
How do you know that this change that they're going to do is going to be successful?
You don't. And not to sound too harsh, but that's not what we do. It's not us. For us, what we need to do is we need to put together a team that we know will be cohesive and can work together and give them the best shot. I think most companies that get bought by private equity have got a really, really good chance of success because they've already proven their market fit. They just haven't been able to scale, usually because of the limitations of a founder. So by getting an exec team that is experienced in doing that, and we typically will always find exec teams who've worked with private equity before, who've scaled businesses before, who've hired leadership teams before, who've done change management, who've put in playbooks. There's a lot of these people around. Just like you've got startup specialists, you've got private equity specialists. So we look for those teams and put those teams together. And because we've been doing it quite a lot, we're quite good at knowing who's going to work well with who. Can't guarantee it, to give them the best chance of success. But ultimately, there's market conditions. There's a zillion things that are outside of that.
So if you were going to pick sort of a few characteristics of a leader who would be able to successfully lead these sorts of changes and growth, what are some of the key characteristics?
I think the number one thing is empathy, because the staff are going to go through more pain than they could possibly imagine. They're going to be much happier on the outside. I think if you look at most human beings, not all, they like structure and they like to be able to see themselves improving and moving forwards. That's proven, scientifically proven all over the place. I hear it on every podcast. It must be. I haven't proven it, but I know there are others that have. So if you're going to take a whole bunch of salespeople who've just been doing whatever, or a whole bunch of product people who've just been doing over, and you've got to say, right, you're now going to do it this way. This is the structure. It's quite controlled. Initially, there's going to be a lot of resistance to that. But once they get to the other side, they're probably going to absolutely love it. They might lose a few on the way, sure. But ultimately, I think it's a good thing. To get through that, probably 6 to 12 months, that exec team all need to have enormous empathy and ability to be able to handle what is essentially trauma. These people are going through trauma, as well as the ability to then scale them when they get to the other side. It's quite a unique human being, very much like a founder is a unique human being. There are people made for certain things, but I think that empathy is probably the number one thing anyone needs when they're putting any kind of change anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Empathy is absolutely so important. But I'm sure you've seen it where it hasn't actually worked out. So think about, do you have any examples of, when a change, you got put in a team, you put them in, you thought it was the best team and they were absolutely going to deliver, but they didn't. What were some of the things that you can pull out there?
Oh, okay. usually when it doesn't work out, it's an individual within the team. I don't think I've ever seen a scenario where the whole team's tanked, thank God, because that would be really question my abilities to do our job. But you do get instances where someone within the team, and it could be the head of sales, head of finance, it's no specific role. And I think then what happens then is the CEO just needs to remove them and needs to be spotted early. The reason is probably also that they are, I'm trying to put this in the right way. There's a lot of people who want to work in companies that have been bought by private equity for the wrong reasons. So what I mean by that is generally going in there, it's not an easy gig at all. You're usually cutting costs to some degree, but you're also growing at the same time. You know, when you are a startup and you get venture capital money, it's just go, go, go. No one cares about money. Private equity is trying to build a profitable business. So you have to trim fat, but then you also have to create efficiencies and ways of growing the business. That's not always easy. I think a lot of people who come to us and want to go into those private equity businesses, they're sitting in a corporate and they go, you know what, I'm not getting paid enough. I want to go into a startup. No, I can't go into a startup. It's definitely not for me. I know I'll go into private equity because I'll work somewhere 5 years and I'll get a massive kicker at the end of it, right? So they go in purely for the money. It's hard to spot them early, but they're the ones that nearly always fail. They're in it completely for the wrong reasons. Others are going in there because they genuinely want to build something. Like, I think that's the key, right? It's not that people don't go in to necessarily be empathetic and help people. That's not the reason people go in there. They go in there because they see an opportunity to take something that's good and make it great, and that excites the hell out of them. A lot of people, however, go in because they think they can go in there for 5 years and make a lot of money. That's nearly always the number one reason they don't make it.
Yeah, and so if we're looking at the people that you're bringing in, my guess is that they come to you and they say, we need these 5 people, and they give you 5 roles and 5 job descriptions, and then you put one person in and they don't work out, and you replace them, you put the next one and you put the next one. And do you get to a point where you say, maybe it's not the person, maybe there's something that they're recruiting for wrong? And do you give advice at that stage?
I give advice way before that stage. As you know, I'm relatively comfortable in sharing my own opinion. So if I don't feel, particularly with the US firms, if I don't feel they're hiring the right kind of people, or if I feel the scorecards they've given me to use to assess these people are wrong, I will quite happily tell them. But I don't think we've ever had a private equity one have where it's gone wrong twice. So, for example, you may have had to replace the odd person, but we've never had that happen more than once. I've had that happen in corporates in my previous companies. And then, yes, you absolutely go, guys, there's something else going on here. And I've had that conversation so many times, not just in putting the wrong people in, but in why people keep turning offers down. You know, there's a whole gamut of reasons. But I'm always happy to share my opinion. What we try and do with the PE firms is have that conversation before we even start the process, and we try and hire the roles concurrently. Now, a lot of people say, no, you should hire the CEO first and let them be involved. I completely disagree. I think you need to hire them concurrently so you can almost see the team developing as you put it all together, and then they should all start roughly around the same time. You do want a CEO in there first. You might get your preferred candidate involved in some last interviews, but ultimately you need to hire it all at the same time. It's really, really important.
And have you ever run group interviews?
For teams?
Yes.
Oh, God, no, that would be a disaster. I think you're breaking about every privacy rule in town as well. No, I have not done that. Maybe we should do that. You know what? We could call that nudge. What should we call that? I don't know. I'm going to have to come up with a nudge name for this. Yeah.
Combat
nudge. Yeah. Nudge combat. I like this.
Oh, yeah, but it's better than team building.
Yeah, well, it's like the old assessment days you used to do for, we used to do a lot of call center hiring when I was younger. And those assessment days are brutal.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember those? Like when you'd have like 100 people turn up for 20 jobs, and it was like the early version of a what do you call it? A show, like, you know, where you have to vote people off. It was almost like that. People get sent home all the time. It was brutal.
Okay, we're glad we've moved on from that one. All right, to wrap up, so where is the future for you? We've got recruitment, we've expanded to media, we've done investment. What's next?
Good question. Look, I think where I really want Nudge to be now is more integrated into these businesses. So we've got our Nudge as a service model where we have people on board in terms of working in companies. That's usually for a sort of period of time. I think I'd like to, it would almost, it's not a consulting model, but I would like to have Nudge people go and work in private equity firms, in venture capital firms, and in corporates as well when they're doing changes. So I think, you know, as much as we don't touch that market now, to me, if you're it's almost like a change management consulting from a people person. You would get your nudge person in to sort out the people part of that program. And they could come in permanently, or they could maybe, and I have thought about this, be trained in certain ways. And we have talked about the Nudge Academy, another nudge name. I think I've even bought a couple of domains around that. So I think it's either going to be more embedded people into companies, or it's going to be some sort of learning business. That's probably where I see it going next.
Well, I think both are fantastic, and I will be looking to see what comes next. Steve, it has been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed this chat.
I'm so glad we've come up with Nudge Combat. I would never have thought of that otherwise.
Can I be on the cover? Get my gloves
100%. Get
out.
your boxing glove. I've seen you boxing online. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Taking just 2 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts would mean the world. Your reviews play a vital role in expanding the reach of this podcast and making a bigger impact.